Here we are in episode 13 of Slice of Life Sciences. Joining me today, who's looking at the camera and ready to go, is Roger Frechette, who is a life science consultant and advisor. He helps early stage companies succeed and grow. His work with his clients leverages his extensive global network, multidisciplinary insights that he's derived over the past 20 years of experience working in the business of life sciences. So, Roger, thank you so much for joining us on Slice Up today.
Well, thank you, David, and delighted to be here with you and sharing bits of my background with you and the Slice of Life Sciences audience.
We appreciate that, and we're excited today because given your number of, especially the most recent guests we've had on the show, are early stage founders, executives that have joined as guests, and that's actually how you and I met, was through a mutual client of ours. We thought it'd be great to learn about the work you're doing, the work you've done for these exact types of companies that are coming on the show, but also listening to the show. So I thought it'd be good to kind of just start not too far back, but far back, just to get your background a little bit, leading into what you're doing today, because I think it's impactful for obviously the Boston biotech ecosystem and beyond. So I guess just to kick it off, and I don't want to go from the beginning, but you've worked in biotech your entire career. So I guess out of curiosity, what motivated you to kind of get into biotech, and also how did you make your way to Boston specifically?
Well, I have to answer that. I have to step back to the beginning, and at the risk of dating myself, that's because there wasn't really a biotech industry when I got started. So, like when I was in graduate school, there were maybe 4 companies that people called biotechnology companies, but it wasn't really the norm. The pharmaceutical industry was in New Jersey, so everything that I was doing was heading toward New Jersey. And about the time my postdoc wrapped up, Vertex was being founded, and that seemed kind of interesting. It was even more interesting to me because there's a few people that I knew who were involved with launching Vertex. So, like Max Tischler had been a president of R&D at Merck and corporate vice president. He retired to be a faculty member at Wesleyan University where I was doing graduate work. And he was a close mentor and advisor to me and other graduate students. He was also an advisor to the Vertex founding team as they were poaching people from Merck to get the company started. And being an influential guy, Max was able to bring in a lot of interesting speakers to present to the graduate school, and included a lot of luminaries in industry and academia, but also other ambitious younger folks like Josh Boger, and who was also a Wesleyan graduate, and Manuel Navia, and other people I met at Yale, for example, Mark Merko and David Armistead, who were part of the early Vertex team. I was still a kid from northern New Hampshire and didn't really get the notion that you could actually start a biotech company, or a pharmaceutical company. That just seemed outlandishly out of reach. But it did start, with the familiarity. It did start settling in a bit of a kernel of the idea. Maybe I'll go out and learn something and then start something. So I started out as a chemist at Johnson & Johnson. And while I really wasn't cut out for the big pharma world, or at least that big pharma, I found that the greatest enjoyment I had in the work was in interactions with interdisciplinary colleagues, folks in biology, pharmacology, process chemistry, and gained a lot of interesting experience working in different therapeutic areas like cardiovascular, inflammation, antibacterial areas, reproductive pharmacology. And that was great. But then I moved to a biotech company. I moved across to the Bay Area in San Francisco, worked for a company called Ribogene. They're built and led the chemistry group and got involved in project leadership for a couple of multidisciplinary projects and strategic alliance management for the Japanese company that was funding these projects. Company had also gone public shortly after I got there, so I was doing presentations to the board of directors and speaking with Wall Street analysts, so gaining some really interesting insights and experience from all these guys. After a couple of years, the company did a reverse merger to form a new company called Questcor, which was not doing research, focusing on marketed products. So I moved to the Boston area. That was just at the turn of the century. I started at England PharmAssociates in January 2000. I was something like the 20th employee. And there I was managing multidisciplinary project teams in the antibacterial space, and also in charge of the strategic partnership that the company had with Glaxo Wellcome, which had been their initial financing. So that was the beginning of it.
And so then after, I imagine through Johnson & Johnson all the way to Paratech, like you just mentioned, you gained tons of experience doing a whole lot. And I guess what pivoted you to deciding to become an entrepreneur yourself? And I think you were alluding to it a little bit by saying maybe the large pharma wasn't necessarily for you or that particular large pharma. But I know that when you co-founded your first company, you were responsible for chemistry strategy, R&D ops. You were overseeing hiring, kind of management of outsourced R&D vendors, so a whole lot of things. So just super interesting piece of the journey. So just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that venture and the company's journey story.
Sure. The one thing that became clear to me in moving to the biotech space is it's much smaller, much nimbler organizational format, and it makes it a lot easier to have a picture in your mind of what you're actually contributing to. You can see every day that you're doing something that's contributing to the progress of an interesting asset or project that's heading toward a product. So following Paratech, I was there for a couple of years. It was a very successful period, and the discovery teams that I've been leading had successfully nominated a candidate, and there was another one coming up close behind. And I took on leadership of the virtual preclinical development program for the first candidate, which eventually became Nuzera after FDA approval. There were interesting challenges. So I'd been managing the corporate collaboration that was now under a lot of strain due to the Glaxo Wellcome SmithKline Beecham merger to form GSK, and I really wasn't envisioning myself leading a clinical development program. So it was time to try something else. And the segue to starting a biotech startup. I didn't try to look for a job. I tried consulting. So consulting version 1. And I was basically offering up my successful drug R&D experience to what was now a growing biotech community. And as it turns out, my second and final client was Genome Therapeutics. This was a Waltham-based anti-infectives biotech company. The R&D was headed up by Richard Labordiniere, who had been a rising star at Rompont-Rorer and Aventis, both companies that have been gobbled up into bigger entities. And he's probably more locally known for as being the CEO of FoldRx, an astonishingly successful biotech in its own right that was acquired by Pfizer. The head of discovery for genome therapeutics was Anya Knapp. So I had been brought in by both of them to help solve a sticky problem that they had in their hit to lead process. And just as the solution was resolving itself, after a few months, the company decided to wrap up R&D operations to reform itself as Ossient and focus on a approved product that they had licensed in. That's when I got together with Anya Knapp. We negotiated a license to the entire drug discovery platform and dropped it into a new startup that we called MaxThera. Again, focused on antibacterial drug discovery. We also recognized that antibacterial discovery was kind of out of favor with both investors and the pharma industry, but we thought it would come back into favor within a few years, mostly because of the growth of concern regarding antibiotic resistance. And of course, that concern continues unabated to this date. But we funded the company with grants. We were among the first BioShield grant recipients from what was to become the Homeland Security Department, and also got a couple of advanced technology grants from the NIAID at NIH, and proceeded to carry on with a very lean semi-virtual operation. It was kind of a natural segue for me because I'd done the preclinical development program at Paratech as a almost completely virtual operation. Company didn't have any preclinical development capabilities in-house. We brought in a regulatory director who helped start up the quality systems. But it ended up being a globally distributed outsourced operation that had me flying to Europe a lot and spending a lot of time on the phone and with email, which was still kind of a new thing back then. And it worked really well. So, before virtual was a thing with the investor community, we started MaxThera as a semi-virtual, highly capital efficient company. It was incubated within Innovators Pharmaceuticals, which is another pharmaceutical company, biotech company that was up in Beverly in the Cummings Center. We shared an office space with Smart Cells, which might be familiar to folks in the Boston area. And we had, fully equipped lab space that we didn't have to pay for other than our monthly rent. The fundamental principle for running the company was, use money for research, not for decor, and proceeded with that very limited budget. The management was bare bones. We surrounded ourselves with advisors, consultants, external legal resources, everything we needed to make the company run effectively. And with my prior experience with outsourcing, albeit with a few false starts in MaxThera, we settled on working with some fellow local entrepreneurs in the services industry. We were one of the first customers for Creagen Biosciences, a Woburn-based medicinal chemistry and synthetic chemistry vendor. We were also among the first customers for Apretica, a pharmacology and safety biology company in Watertown that's now part of Ciprotex. And at the time, there weren't too many options for outsourcing things like microbiology or enzymology, so we had to hire a few scientists. And that turned out to be a fairly straightforward process as well. And we found an amazing microbiologist who was doing relatively uninteresting work to her at another startup. And because there weren't a lot of companies doing antimicrobial discovery work, she jumped at the chance to work with us and was able to start on very short notice. Another scientist that we landed had been part of the core biochemistry team at Genome Therapeutics a few years earlier. She was a major contributor to the lead assets in our portfolio. She had taken a job at Genzyme after Ossient was formed, and we lured her away with our location because Inotech was in Beverly. We had an opportunity to address one of her key needs. I mean, they're interested in starting a family, but couldn't afford anything bigger than the studio apartment within commuting
Yeah.
distance of Genzyme. And moved to Maxthera in Beverly and had a house with 3 bedrooms and a nice big backyard 10 minutes away from our international headquarters. Throughout the operation of Maxthera, I was working with Anya and with our advisors to introduce our work to investors, pharma companies, and big biotechs, and basically building relationships and looking for new investment opportunities and co-development partners all throughout the process.
So how did it all end, Max? There, I guess, was there an exit, and then how did this segue into? You mentioned consulting. You said consulting version 1. How did it get into consulting version 2?
Yeah, well, consulting version 2 derived from a gradual evolution of the exit from Maxthera. So by mid to late 2007, we realized that we were going to need some additional funding. And if you recall that time period,
Yep.
yeah, you probably start to smile a little bit. So what turned out is starting to secure additional funding became an opportunity for an exit. There was going to be a slight opening of a window of interest in antibacterial R&D funding, but it wasn't going to be for another couple of years, so it was too late for us. The economy crashed out from under us. But in that bit of a crisis, we gained a really powerful lesson in the strength and merits of networking. Our business advisor, who is based in the south of England, was at the bio partnering event in San Diego, where he met an Australian banker who was working for an LA-based investment bank. He had partners in Hong Kong and Western Australia, and he was really eager to try his hand at biotech financing and deal making. Long story short, by early 2010, we had been acquired by Biota Holdings, a Melbourne, Australia-based company that was the originator of the flu drug Relenza that was sold by GSK for some time. About the same time, Biota had also acquired Prolysis, an Oxford, England-based biotech company, also in the antibacterial space. And they asked us to consult with them to help fold these assets into their portfolio. By mid-2011, when the work with Biota had wrapped up, we provided our lab space to the North Shore Interventures founders to help launch their biotech incubator. I served briefly as an entrepreneur in residence with NSIB and started looking for new clients. The early days in consulting started with some mentoring activities, some formal and ad hoc programs through networking and meeting people. And along the way, I helped launch the Creagen Chemistry Incubator at kind of a spin out from the Creagen Biosciences. For some time, I put heads together with a local professor to spin out a new biotech called Frontera that was centered around a really interesting approach to treating acute respiratory distress syndrome. That turned out to be a bit ahead of its time, and we weren't able to get it financed. Throughout this, I was realizing that, still hadn't been an experienced consultant yet, but realized that mentoring for free and founding unfunded startups was really fascinating and lots of fun, but did little to pay bills. And learned that landing paid contracts required a really dedicated effort to purposeful networking and leveraging relationships in my network to get referrals. So that's effectively been the path to all of my work over the last 10 to 12 years, where as a consultant, I've worked with a wide variety of companies spanning the life sciences sectors in areas ranging from drug delivery technologies, organs on chips, diagnostics, specialty chemistry methodologies for manufacturing, and of course also in therapeutics R&D. So I recently concluded a 4-year engagement with GrowBio, a synthetic biology spinout from the George Church Lab that's developing novel protein therapeutics. Really cool science. They're teaching E. coli and other microbes to express proteins with non-standard amino acids in the backbone that can do interesting custom activities. My work with them got GrowBio to the stage of justifying a full-time CBO before moving on. The current client I'm spending most of my time with is Concerto Biosciences, MIT Broad spinout, developing a really fascinating proprietary platform for novel microbiome modulating products. This is targeting therapeutics as well as other business sectors. It's been really interesting and diverse, and certainly continuing.
Yeah. Do you typically, or I guess do you sometimes act as more of a fractional executive, or kind of lead, like you mentioned about Grow, leading up to them finding someone to come on as a CBO? And I guess with that, are there specific services that you traditionally have worked or done more in the past, whether it's business development or anything else?
Yeah, I think there hasn't really been a typical. It would be kind of interesting if there were, I suppose. But
the typical is the atypical.
In principle, as a consultant, I can offer services that relate to any of the multiple hats I've worn through the years. But in practice, the most common needs that I tend to address with clients are involving strategy and business development. As you've mentioned, I have a strong background as a scientist. Worked in R&D from earliest stages of discovery to clinical trials, layering that experience onto business background that's encompassed startup foundation to exit, strategic partnerships, management. It gives an opportunity with these dual experiences as a scientist and a business executive to focus on bridging business and science. With clients, I'm certainly never going to be doing their science, but I can quickly gain a functional understanding of their work, which gives a lot of leverage to doing different things with them. So depending on the company's needs, I can help them with optimizing their written and oral presentations for investors or partnerships. If needed, I can help optimize their business plan or help assess the assets in their portfolio. With companies that have their R&D strategy in a good place, my work might focus more on helping them to build relationships with prospective business partners, and as needs arise, help them negotiate, close business deals.
And how have you, just out of curiosity, how have you historically or in the past found clients? Is it through the network you've built over the years and then referrals?
Yeah, all of my client engagements, without exception, have derived from my network and referrals from my network. The way that it works is, I'm naturally curious about innovative solutions to problems, and generally optimistic about the capacity that smart humans have for translating innovative science and to novel products. And so that makes it easy to engage in conversations. That's not to say that every conversation leads to a contract, right? So I have a lot more interesting conversations than I have closed engagements. And some client contracts happen within a few weeks of meeting somebody, others a year or more. And some conversations just end up being another part of the network or some kind of a mentoring relationship.
And what do you like most about working with some of these early stage companies?
Well, I had alluded to it earlier. I left I left big pharma primarily to get into the faster-paced world of biotech. It's extremely gratifying and satisfying to have a role where you can see on a day-to-day basis what you're doing that's clearly progressing an innovative concept toward a product that meets a medical need. It's something that's going to help people. Um, and throughout my entrepreneurial journey, I've encountered countless extraordinary helpful mentors and advisors. And as a mentor and a consultant, I've also had the opportunity to effectively pay it forward, contributing to the success of the next generation of sometimes scary smart entrepreneurs. And through it all, still experiencing the thrill of that fast-paced progress toward interesting products.
And I know you're obviously embedded in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here. I noticed you were vice chair of the life sciences for Boston. I think it's called Boston Entrepreneurs Network. Can you just give us a quick background on what that network is and what sort of events, get-togethers you've been doing?
Sure. Thanks for asking about that. ENET is one of my pet projects. So ENET is an entrepreneur education organization. It was started in 1991 as an IEEE special interest group. We currently do 20 events per year, and our program is organized as kind of a startup mini MBA program. So each event features a presentation or a panel discussion on a specific topic of importance for tech, biotech-based entrepreneurship. And each event starts and ends with networking, which we consider to be essential tools of the trade. We also offer an opportunity for nascent entrepreneurs to practice their elevator pitch. We call it the E-Minute, which is the E-Minute segment, rather. It's a 90-second pitch in front of a live, generally friendly audience, which includes constructive feedback offered by the event's expert speakers. Importantly, we wrap up each calendar year with the Entrepreneurship. This is our annual Boston Harbor cruise that features great food, usually well in excess of 200 people on board, and enforced networking. Wow. That is, once we set sail, even the most reluctant networkers on board have nowhere to go, so they might as well talk to somebody.
And I know that. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I know when we got coffee a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned that you'd also been doing mentoring for some entrepreneurs. Is that kind of as part of the ENET, or is that just more on an informal basis, kind of separate from the more formal consulting services you offer?
Yeah, the mentoring that I do is it's a mix. Some of it is very informal mentoring with entrepreneurs I meet while networking through ENET online. Most often, though, it's been done through formal programs that are offered by local institutions. So I've done formal mentoring with organizations like MassBio, Boston University, Mass Tech Transfer Center. Recently, I started contributing to new programs that have been put in place at Lab Central and at UMass Lowell's M2D2 incubator program. Taking this up and looking at the kind of thing that I've been doing with clients as a consultant, but I've also started exploring ways to help early stage companies with a more formal advisory role. So, while I'm happy to join a startup advisory board, what I'm thinking here is more like a retained advisor role, or perhaps more like a founder coach. Executive coaches are all over the place now. It's a big business, but I'm thinking that new executives in the entrepreneurial space could use some of this help as well. So that would involve periodic meetings, on-call helper advice. Basically helping an entrepreneur to help themselves in the early days of their startup with a level of engagement that might be higher than what a typical mentor can provide, but that's not quite at the level of a formal fractional executive engagement.
Yeah. Have you, I think this is an interesting question for me, just over the years working with some of the companies you've mentioned, are there common themes you've observed from the various companies and innovators that have proved to be common denominators for the company to achieve success?
You know, every startup and every founder that I've come across has some unique qualities. They're all unique individuals, so I guess that sort of makes sense. The only common determinant of success that I can think of that I've encountered is, founders need to be clear on what they don't know and open to soliciting and processing advice and inputs from experts to help them to refine both the science and technology and the business. I think that's the clearest determinant of success. I mean, if you know everything, you're going to fail.
That's good, almost piece of advice right there. So I guess we're running a little bit low on time, and I want to ask you two more questions. But your career has obviously encompassed being a business executive, project alliance manager, and scientist. Obviously, everything you just mentioned about consultant, being so invested in the ecosystem, even with eNet, and seeing some of these early stage companies. Like there wasn't obviously this many, like you mentioned, when you started your career. What excites you most about the biotech industry, but maybe even more specifically the Boston Biotech Life Science Cluster?
Well, the biotech industry has really grown explosively in the last 20 years. And I've worked with cluster organizations in Europe where I've seen it there as well. But the most exciting aspect of the Boston biotech ecosystem is just the sheer volume of it. I mentioned when I was just getting started that Vertex was being launched. That was an inspiring example of what was possible in a world dominated by huge vertically integrated companies, and it planted a lot of seeds for inspiration for scientists interested in something different that turns out to be entrepreneurship. But it certainly wasn't the norm. Today, big companies are increasingly relying on innovations developed at nimble startups to fuel their pipelines. So that's in turn driving the additional growth in the biotech sector. And now, ambitious young researchers, and they don't need to be all that young. So folks in the academic labs today, whether they're in Boston institutions or elsewhere, it's not hard to look at the countless examples of successful innovations that have been developed by entrepreneurs that look and feel just like them. So it's most decidedly not an easy path to take to be an entrepreneur, but there are ample precedents that inspire nascent entrepreneurs, and the by far the greatest growth of that sector has been in the greater Boston area.
And Roger, usually I close with asking whether it's a founder or executive of an early stage company, I guess advice they'd give to someone in their shoes when they started as a first time founder. I think you somewhat answered that question. So I guess I'll change it up a little bit for you, and just maybe just to go in light of what you're doing today. When do you typically engage with companies and founders, and is it ever too early, and what's the kind of sweet spot stage wise that you do your work?
Well, I'm a kind of a natural networker, which is kind of weird because I'm also profoundly introverted. So it doesn't seem like that ought to be the case. But I mentioned the that natural curiosity and interest. I'm always talking to people and fascinated by interesting startup concepts and entrepreneurs' approaches to things. So conversations can be all over the place, and often can lead to interesting mentoring relationships. But from the standpoint of my consulting work, in particularly looking at strategic planning and business development, which have become the mainstays of my consulting business. The companies that are most often the ones where I can have the greatest impact are early stage, not too early stage. So companies with some seed financing or perhaps their Series A financing, where they're looking to grow, but they don't necessarily need to bring on a high-priced CBO. They need to sort out, continue to refine their approach and their business strategy, align their science to their business. That's the stage where I can really have a potent impact with companies and help them to get to the next stage.
Great. Well, we have tons of early stage founders and executives that listen to this podcast. So I'm glad you share that, and just wanted to say thank you for taking the time, Roger. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I appreciate it, and I'd encourage everyone to listen. This Roger puts on some great events, and reach out to him. So thanks,
David. Really great questions. As always, I enjoy talking with you.